around. So you know you're not dreaming big enough if at least one person doesn't think you're crazy. So that's a clue. Because how many of you are afraid of dreaming big because somebody will think you're crazy? Many of us are, and limit that. And that's part of it. It's how you know that you're getting outside your own box sometimes. So look at something grand or big or possible for you. And one of the biggest issues we deal with at the Wright Institute, people that come to us, they come with a goal they want to achieve in their career or their relationship, or they have a problem they want to solve, and we can handle that pretty quickly. We now know the technology and what people need to do that. But the biggest problem we have is that people don't want enough. They don't dream big enough. And without a big enough vision, it's something that really matters, it doesn't give you what you need to take the steps in your life. And many of us have had our dreams squashed. We've given up on them. We've gotten a little hopeless, or we tried them and we failed, or people made fun of us, or we felt we were threatening someone, and we've dimmed the light in our dreams. What that's reminding us is that our dreams matter, and it's important to dream, and it's important to do something about that dream. Now, I'm not talking about fantasies here, ladies. Fantasies are different than dreams. Don't act on those, okay? I mean, unless it's legal, all right? So in that way. Fantasies and pipe dreams are different than true dreams that come from who you are and from your heart. They're really a picture of possibilities for yourself. Fantasies are an escape from life. Dreams are entering more fully into life. So I think you've done pretty well with this quiz so far. So can we applaud everybody for even thinking and sharing here? That was good. Applause is good. So each one of those movies represents different kinds of commitments that any of us can use. And if by the end of my talk, don't worry, you don't have to make the perfect decision. I mean, people say, oh my God, if it's one decision, make one decision that guides everything in my life. What if I make the wrong decision? And they're paralyzed. You can't make a wrong one. And making any one of these commitments can help guide you. And you can use any of them as a sample. We call them test drive one decisions, to try on, to see what it's like to live that way. So see which of these appeal to you, and by the time we're done, you'll have some other ideas of what those can look like. But they're all good. I will ask you, what about the one with Tom Cruise in it? What was that one? Jerry Malone. I want to use that one for a second. Usually when I talk to groups of women, and there's a lot of women here, they can't remember the name of the movie, they don't remember anything about the plot, but Tom Cruise was in his underwear doing a handstand. They've got that, they can remember. But what is it that he's choosing there? Do you remember how he was? How many of you saw the movie? Let me see that. Okay. Do you remember how he was in the beginning of the movie? You know, he was like, hubba hubba, go for the money, lie, spin, whatever. But what's he choosing here in that scene we just saw? He's choosing the truth, to be genuine, to be himself more fully, that he's lost the ability to BS. And that he had a great ability to do that in the beginning of that movie. And he's letting that go. And his one decision is about being genuine, about being truthful. That's a quality of life that any of us can choose, to be more genuine. How many of you feel like you're living somebody else's life sometimes, not your own? How many of you have had that sense? How many of you don't know yourself enough to even raise your hand right now? It can happen. So there is something about us being more authentic, being more genuine, being true to ourselves that's appealing, that's important for us to find out who we are and to be more consonant with that. That's how we help ourselves have more satisfaction. All right, so you've got some ideas now, and you see how important this is. That's why that's there and why it's so inspiring. But I want to give you a more real-life example of another story. Can we do a story again? Are you okay with story? Just go, yes, Judith. Yes, that's good, great. All right, this is another story, and you'll have to, we'll work with this afterwards to see how to apply this more fully to your life. This is another story that takes place actually not too long after Bucky Fuller's story, but this occurs in 1936, but we're no longer in the United States now, we've gone to France. I thought if I gave you an exotic locale, you'd like this story, but we're in France now, it's 1936. And imagine now there's a little classroom of rambunctious little 8-year-old boys. And it's the end of the school day, and the bell rings, and the boys are racing out of the classroom, jostling one another, bumping into one another, trampling over one another like rambunctious 8-year-old boys do. And one little boy is pushed from behind in this, and he falls in this unfortunate set of circumstances. He falls on the corner of the teacher's desk, and he's blinded. This little 8-year-old boy is now blinded. Now, what happens with this little boy is really interesting, though, because he was enfolded by a pretty enlightened family, and his parents decided that they were going to keep a very high quality of life around him, and they weren't going to use his blindness as an excuse They were going to, and that's an important kind of decision, I think, for them to make. But in that, this little boy, his name is Jacques, Jacques decided that as an 8-year-old boy, I'm going to enjoy my life, and I'm going to keep learning and growing, because that's what I've loved, and I'm going to keep exploring, learning, and growing, and I'm going to have fun, and I'm going to enjoy my life. And he did. He was blind, but he wasn't unhappy. He decided he would enjoy himself, and he did that, and he decided he'd still learn and grow, because he was a smart kid, and he enjoyed that. So he learned Braille, and he learned how to read in a new way, and his parents decided with him that he was going to continue in the same school, not go to a special school for blind kids. Nothing wrong with that. They just felt that that was a choice that he wanted, and they would support him with that. School wasn't happy about that. They didn't have laws against it at the time, but it sure went against the cultural norms. But he was able to be in his school and be with his friends, and he kept learning, and he kept stretching himself, and at the end of a year, he was first in his class, which is pretty amazing when you think about that capacity. But not only that, not only was he still growing intellectually, he started realizing that there was other ways to learn and grow. And even though he could no longer see visually with his eyes, he discovered that there was a kind of inner seeing that he was able to do. He actually could sense light. And that it was this fascinating process for him because he was able to go, he would go running with his friends. Well, he couldn't visually see, but they'd grab him by the shoulder and they'd run together and he'd play and they enjoyed being with him. But he started to get, he actually could kind of sense where the trees were. He could sense where the hills were. He could start sensing things without this external vision. And he realized that there was an internal light, is how he called it, that gave him a sense of seeing without his eyes. And he started to sense more. He could feel differences in people's tones of voice. His other senses are getting more heightened. He could tell when the teachers were having a bad day, just by the tone of their voice. Or his acuity was raising in himself. And there was something happening with this little boy, and he still was a pretty joyous little guy. And he kept on this path, learning and growing and exploring. But he realized this kind of inner seeing that he had only worked when he was enjoying his life. When he felt sorry for himself and when he forgot to, when he wasn't growing and he was kind of stuck, he lost the ability. And I think there's a metaphor for us in that as well. So he kept going on this path. And now if you can think about this is France in the late 1930s now. What's happening in Europe during this time? The war is coming. Germany is advancing in Europe. And he's starting to realize that he doesn't feel like he's getting the truth in the news. He doesn't feel like people are getting what's really going on. Somehow he can sense that. And he says, the only way I'm going to find out what's going on here is to learn German. So he learns German so that he can listen to the radio broadcast himself and sense what's really going on, hear it for himself. And he's horrified by what he's hearing. And that added to this one decision. He had this decision he was going to love his life and learn and grow. And now it became very important that he discerned truth. He added truth to this one decision. And so this boy keeps doing these things. He's still a great student. Now he's about 15. France is invaded by Germany and taken over his home country. Now think about that, what the Nazis were about at that time, and he's blind. So they were about having this perfect race, no one with disabilities or whatever, and there's this blind boy. He realized at that time that there was something, this is very critical for him, that he had another choice to make. He said that if I am just known as the blind boy, I will be at least ostracized, and chances are something worse can happen to me. That I have to define myself as something other than blind. And he realized he was very upset by, obviously, what was going on, and the truth wasn't getting through, and he felt like people have to know the truth. And he banded together with a few of his friends, and they decided to become active in the resistance. He started a resistance movement at the age of 16 that grew to 600 teenagers and young adults that were publishing newspapers, cutting through the propaganda, getting the news out to the people in France. Their organization then joined with Charles de Gaulle and became this bigger network of resistance. All the same time, he's still a top student at his high school, and doing this in secret on the side. So this is kind of an amazing thing because this blind boy is now this leader of resistance in France. But not only that, what had happened is that he defined his role because his friends knew him this way. They defined him as the one who could sense truth in people. So he was the recruiter. He was the one that interviewed other kids that wanted to join the resistance because he could sense if they were true or not, or if they were there to spy, or what it was through those heightened senses. And that was a huge skill that he had. And that's what he was known for. So he did that, and without fail, for a long period of time, everyone he interviewed that he approved was part of the network, until one day there was a young man that came in to interview with him. He didn't trust this guy. He didn't feel like it was the right move, but he was perfectly suited for a location that they, and the job that they really needed. His friend says, you know, Jacques, you can't be that fussy now. We have to do this. Let him go. And he did, and that was the young man that betrayed them and turned him in. The Nazis came to get this young 16, 17-year-old boy, pulled him away from his family, took him to prison, beat him, questioned him day and night, and then shipped him off to Buchenwald. He arrives at Buchenwald, and the minute he gets there, remember he speaks German, so he understands now what's going on. And everyone who's crippled or diseased in any way is being killed immediately. He knows this because he can hear that. And he enters in and he said, oh, I have to be something other than a blind man here. And he went up and he overheard them saying that there was a lot of Russian prisoners that they'd brought in, but nobody could communicate with them. He spoke to them in German and said, I speak Russian. He didn't. There was an exception to that commitment to truth I talked to you about, but we'll forgive him in this case. He said, I speak Russian. And they said, okay, we really need someone that speaks Russian, and they put him in as a translator, and he learned Russian by speaking to the Russians, and then did provide that service. He saved himself out of that. And then now he's at Buchenwald, and his commitment is to enjoy his life, and he's in a concentration camp, and he's enjoying his life, and teaching other people to do that, and being a source of support and morale and truth and honesty and connection while he's there. He's there, it's to the end of the war, it's about 15 months later, and now the Germans understand that the war is over and the American forces are coming very quickly. And they gave everybody in this concentration camp the choice. They said, you know, you can just leave the camp now, or if you stay, we're going to set up these bombs and we'll detonate it because we're going to have this be gone. We don't want them to see the evidence of this when they come. And Jacques listened again inside himself, with this unerring sense that he had, and against logic, he decided to stay. He stayed. I think 10,000 people left, and as they left the camp, they were gunned down and killed. He and the few who stayed, and he and another friend were the only two of that entire movement that survived, and only 20 of the 3,000 people that had come to that camp at the time that he had that got through the war and got through this onto the other side. And I'm telling you this powerful story in many, many ways. And Jacques' battles didn't end there. He went back. He wanted to go to graduate school because he's a brilliant young man. And there was some odd thing they'd put in the laws because of what had been happening. And they decided people with disabilities couldn't go to a public school, couldn't go to university. He fought that, even though he tested the highest and the top 3. He got into university, he did get his advanced degrees, and he did become a professor of humanities, and he taught, his students loved him. He actually came over to the States, and he was a professor here, and got married and had children, and there was a lot of beautiful things that happened with him in his story. But there's several reasons I'm telling you this story, because you're sitting here like, oh, he's not a woman, he's not Asian. Why is she telling us this story? But let's look at this story because it is important for us. And I'm going to have you think about this for a minute and look at this. Because there's many defining moments for Jacques. His name is Jacques Lucéran. And there's many defining moments that were made from this commitment of enjoying his life, learning and growing in the truth. Those were all his one decision. And that guided him step by step. That's what helped him survive, and not only that, but to have a high quality of life. But the other part I really want you to understand, that if he had not defined himself with this one decision, if he had not defined himself by his gifts, he would have been dead. That's a very powerful reminder to us. Because if we don't define ourselves by a better and deeper commitment, to find our gifts, to share our gifts, to have that something that defines us, we will be known by our limitations. We will be known by our cultural stereotypes. We will not transcend that. You'll be the, you know, the little blonde woman, or that Asian guy over there, but not who you are as a human being, as a person with your unique gifts. These decisions help you incorporate your background, your culture, your unique perspectives, just as Jacques as a blind man was, but it helps you transcend that to be known for who you are and what you are about.